Washington's path to victory in a critical Week 9 matchup against the Seattle Seahawks requires their strength to go up against the Seahawks' strength and actually outmuscle their muscle. That and more coming up right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9. Right here with you 5 days a week, and you can also find me writing about the Commanders for Commanders Game Day, CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's host of sites. You can also follow me on X at DHarrison82. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view of the day to the everydayers, those who come through for every single episode. A special thank you goes out to you once again for making it through for today's, in which we are going to discuss our bets and our data-supported fantasy must-start of the week. We're going to break down how the Washington Commanders defense has to neutralize Seattle's specific situational tendencies. But first, we're going to start it all off with the path to victory for the Washington Commanders being strength on strength and using that strength to exploit a weakness on the Seattle Seahawks defense. All that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and it's brought to you by Mazda. Like the players, Mazda sweats every details because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward Mazda Move and Be Moved. So the Washington Commanders enter Week 9, 3-5, in desperate need of a victory. I've said this before on other episodes. If you enter the bye week after the game in Spain, which is a couple weeks away, at 6-5, then you feel okay. You're in position. You've got the opportunity, get a little bit healthy over the bye, and hopefully before the bye even, and you come out of it and you've got a roadmap to the postseason. If you go into it 5-6 or worse, then things are a little bit different. In order for the Washington Commanders to go 6-5 entering the bye week, they have to win the next 3 games. If they lose this week, honestly, you got to beat the Detroit Lions, or else you're at risk of going 4-7, and then the Miami Dolphins in Week 11 certainly not a gimme by any chance or by any means. And if this team is 3-8 for some reason heading into the bye week out of Spain, then we'll probably be firmly in mock draft season, and that's not a place we want to go, right? We've been able to avoid going to mock draft season too early for a year. We've had that experience. We like how it feels. We want to stay there. So that's what this episode is all about. How do we make sure, and from our perspective, obviously we have very little impact on the game, but how can the Commanders make sure that they keep the chance of being 6-5 coming out of the bye week alive? Well, it's going to start off with the Washington Commanders' biggest offensive strength going up against the Seattle Seahawks' biggest defensive strength. And yes, it is the rushing attack. And I know the rushing attack has dwindled. It has dropped down to third. It was first at one point about a month ago, and it is now third in the NFL. But it's still up there. Like that's kind of the point, right? Like you can't drop down to third unless you were at the top to begin with at some point. So that means your rushing attack was very good at one point in time. I will do this for, I don't know, I feel like the 5th week in a row. I will pound the table and say that at least part of what made that Washington Commanders rushing attack number 1 in the league was getting Chris Rodriguez Jr. involved in that rushing attack. It was getting Jeremy McNichols involved and Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt involved after you set the tone, set the table with Chris Rodriguez, having that powerful rushing attack ability, doing all those things. I feel like they need to go back there, but they haven't gone back there since they had success with it back-to-back weeks. They were the number 1 rushing offense at that time. They haven't gone back there. And I don't want to say it's directly just because Chris isn't getting involved, but I do think that it's something you can do to kind of just illustrate. Like we're coming out here to be physical, to be forceful, and that's what we want to do, is build this thing off of a physical rushing attack. Again, top 10 rushing offense so far. Jayden Daniels certainly can be a big part of that depending on just how healed that hamstring really is. It is going to be cold on Sunday night. It's supposed to be in the 40s Sunday night for kickoff. So, cold muscles, they tighten up a little bit. So we'll have to kind of see how Jaden goes and progresses throughout the game with that. But Seattle's defense, rush defense, is number 1 in the NFL, allowing just 3.29 yards per carry so far through 8 weeks, through 7 games. The Seahawks also coming off of a bye. And on the crossover episode, this is something that we noted was a key to victory for both sides, right? For the Washington Commanders, get the run game going. use it to set up that play action for the Seattle Seahawks defense. Stop that rushing attack from ever getting going, because without Terry McLaurin, especially on the field, you do that and you don't open up the possibility of that play action game, because I think that's really what this game is going to boil down to, is how effective that Commanders play action can be. And of course, your play action with no rushing attack is never really all that effective. So the Seattle Seahawks defense vulnerable through the air. Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks all but verified that with us, ranking 23rd in opposing passing yards per game. This is an area that the Seattle Seahawks are vulnerable, and they're going to continue to be vulnerable even with the return of Devin Witherspoon. Safety Julian Love had a setback in his injury recovery, and look, person to person, we feel for him. We hope that they can get that on the right track, but competitively, he is out, and that's great news for the Washington Commanders. Also, wide receiver Derek Young, tight end Eric Saubert, and wide receiver Jake Bobo all out for the Seattle Seahawks this weekend as well. So commit to the run, use that 12 personnel package, whether it's Zach Ertz and John Bates and Ben Sinnott, or it's that eligible offensive lineman, right? You bring in Trent Scott to be an eligible offensive lineman. Technically, he's a quote-unquote tight end then. Use him and John Bates as blockers. Get that big line out there, open up some lanes, whether it's Jeremy McNichols, whether it's Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, whether it's Chris Rodriguez. Again, I think they need to get Chris back involved. Even if you're not going to do that, man, set that tone, establish that run. They were doing a really good job of it against the Kansas City Chiefs. I think you need to go out there and have that same approach and that same mentality and try to open up that play action pass down the field. And look, it worked against Kansas City Chiefs. Again, even that play action pass, I know they didn't connect on everything. There was miscommunication, some wrong routes run, all that kind of stuff. But Jayden Daniels is back in there. The receivers that you have in there, at least for the most part, right? Like Debo has had a pretty good amount of action this year. Luke, obviously, Jalen Lane, Chris Moore. Like Terry is actually, I know he's the most talented receiver, like hands down. Don't get me wrong. He is the most hands down talented receiver on this roster. But truth be told, he's also had the least amount of practice, the least amount of prep work on this roster as well. So if you're going to have mistakes like wrong routes run and all that kind of stuff, it's more likely to happen with him just because he's still a human being. He's not superhuman. He is still a human being. So most talented, sure, but also potentially the least secure, the least sure of his route assignments and all those things, just because he hasn't been around to practice them as much. So you have a group of receivers out there who do have that experience. They have all that in their repertoire. So use that against the Seahawks, challenge that secondary deep, but you got to set up, again, those play action passes by establishing your run early. The next key is going to be on defense. We're looking at the Seattle Seahawks' glaring weakness on offense. So the Washington Commanders' top 10 pass rush, you have to attack that Seattle Seahawks right guard position. That is the spot that Locked On Seattle Seahawks, we've been talking about it all week, has been identified as the glaring weakness. That right guard spot has been a turnstile, allowing a league-leading 19 pressures in that position. The Washington Commanders, right guard, who's the guy that's usually there? Left defensive tackle, Daron Payne. You can also have some other guys there. Maybe you try to, stunt Frankie Louvu in there. Whatever it is, man, you've got to attack that right guard spot for the Washington Commanders defense. Get that sub package in that you use as your most athletic frontline pass rushers. Use your linebackers like Bobby Wagner, second level players. I want to see Quan Martin get some blitzes. You know what I mean? Do some things that allow them to generate pressure with just 4 rushers. Doesn't have to be all linemen, right? It can be 3 linemen and a linebacker, 3 linemen and a safety. But do what you can, because you're going to need extra safety or extra coverage, I should say, to help kind of contain Jaxson Smith-Njigba, the Seattle Seahawks #1 wide receiver. And that brings us to the injury report. Game status updates put out on Friday. Terry McLaurin is out. We already knew that. Tight end Colson Yankoff also going to miss another game with his hamstring injury. Questionable entering the weekend. Tight end John Bates with an ankle. Defensive tackle Johnny Newton with an ankle, which is a big, he's been doing really well. The Commanders need Johnny Newton to be available, so we'll see how that goes. And left tackle Laramie Tunsil, again, another big player that this team needs to be able to get healthy if they can. If not, Brandon Coleman did a pretty decent job. I like Sheldon Day, although obviously Johnny Newton's upside is certainly higher than Sheldon Day's right now. Washington, where they're good to go. Quarterback Jayden Daniels coming back, officially official. You love that news. Kicker Matt Gay, defensive lineman Javon Kinlaw, all cleared on Friday and expected to play in this game. So that's obviously very, very important. And of course, Jayden Daniels is the biggest one there of them all coming back with his legs, with his arm, going up against that Seattle Seahawks top 10 pass rush that, by the way, very rarely blitzes. I think the Seahawks are like 29th in the league in blitz rate. So Jaden's going to see a lot of coverage. He's going to see a lot of guys in there. Going to need to be able to extend plays, take advantage of openings with his legs. So hopefully that mobility is good to go with him being cleared for this game. So while the offense has to attack that specific element of the Seahawks defense in order to help open up things downfield, they also have to contain one of the league's most explosive passing attacks as we flip sides a little bit and look at what the Seattle Seahawks are going to try to do on Sunday night. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Mazda. This episode's Moving the Game Forward is brought to you by Mazda, where there are moments in sports that do more than just put points on the board. They redefine the game. And for this one, we are going all the way back to the Washington Commanders' victory against the Los Angeles Chargers to kind of remind ourselves, remind the team a little bit of what they're really capable of. 99-yard drive to really put the game away. Goal line interception. Remember, tipped pass by Deron Payne, intercepted by Mikey Sainristil at the 1-yard line, gives the Washington Commanders back the ball. And Jayden Daniels leads a 13-play, 99-yard drive, finishes off with touchdown pass that game to wide receiver Deebo Samuel. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to every Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of a game and you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next to fourth quarter comebacks. And of course, you can stack wagers for same game parlays. Every dayers, I love my same game parlays. We got a same game parlay for this Sunday night's game, Commanders versus Seahawks. It always gives you a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps everything a little bit more exciting, especially when your team is making that late push, or if you're watching a team that you're not necessarily invested in as a fan, it gives you something to invest in. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The Washington Commanders defense has got to be disciplined Sunday night. They've got to be situationally sound, and their game plan has to be targeted at neutralizing the Seattle Seahawks' biggest offensive strength, which is creating explosive plays. And I know, Commanders fans, you hear me say that, and you're probably already shaking your boots. Washington Commanders don't have a top 10 run defense. They don't have a top 10 pass defense. They don't have pretty much anything top 10 defensively to really hang their hat at other than pass rush rates, which is good, but clearly it has not been enough to keep their deficiencies hidden. So you got to force the Seattle Seahawks, first and foremost, into predictable passing situations, and that's where the defense has to contain those quick game concepts on early downs and also minimize the Seattle Seahawks run game. The good news is the Seattle Seahawks run game not ranked all that highly overall. However, as I talked to Whitt Jr. about on Thursday during the press conference, and he emphatically acknowledged, the Seattle Seahawks, while they're not good overall in running, they're really good at generating explosive plays running. In fact, Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks even shared with us they're like top 10 in explosive runs. So it's basically feast or famine. The Seahawks either getting nothing or losing yards in their rushing attack, or they're getting chunk plays, 10 plus yards. You need the Washington Commanders defense to turn that into the former, not the latter. And Whitt Jr. even acknowledging their edge defense just has not been solid. They're not pursuing the edge correctly. They're not setting the edge strong enough, and it's leading to a lot of problems. And on 1st and 10, the Seattle Seahawks are very run focused. In the first quarter, they're running the ball over 57% of the time. On 1st and 10, their primary run play inside zone. It's a run play that targets the A and B gaps. So A gaps on either side of the center. B gaps are between the guard and the tackle on either side. Though that's where they're running, between the tackles. Now, according to Whitt, that's where his defense is the strongest. Although against Kansas City Chiefs, we did see them do some damage against Washington Commanders' interior defensive line on the run in the run game. Could just be a one-off. Hopefully it is. Seahawks like to run out of 11 personnel. That's one running back, one tight end, 3 receivers on the field. So they're not exactly going heavy. So it'll be imperative that the Washington Commanders not allow them to get yards doing that. This is a strength-on-strength matchup in the sense that interior run defense has actually been a strength for the Washington Commanders, and that's something that they need to keep going up. Put the Seattle Seahawks in 3rd and long situations where you not only have to pass, but you have to pass to a certain point, keep the ball in front of you, rally to it, bring them down. Don't let explosive plays happen. That's where the defense is going to have to step up big time in this one. And in order to do that, you got to stop that 1st and 10. Like I said, very, very run focused on that 1st and 10. So you got to do that. Get the defensive line to push that Seattle Seahawks offensive line back a little bit. We talked about that right guard. Penetrate there, push him out of the way. Heck, if you got to throw that dude into the running back, do what you have to do to make sure the Seahawks don't gain ground on those 1st down runs, and then contain the explosive passes. That's what zone defense is for. This defense is typically a cover 3. Ideally, you're trying to keep the ball in front of you, but this has become the Commanders' defense's biggest vulnerability. 28th in the NFL. They're allowing almost 8 yards per pass attempt this season, and Seattle is going to attack this with their highly potent passing attack, averaging over 8 yards per pass attempt. So statistically, they're matching up very, very well if you're a Seahawks fan. The secondary can't have busted coverages, man. I mean, this is something that I think, fortunately, we saw less of against Kansas City Chiefs. The problem is when we saw them, they essentially all came at the same time. Like in the first half, you only had the one busted coverage, was on the 27-yarder to Xavier Worthy, which I still say was on Mikey Sanders still. And then in the second half, and then the first half, you really didn't have any others. In the second half, you end up with like 5 or 6, and they all happened in like the same 2 or 3 drives and possessions, and really allowed the Kansas City Chiefs to take over. So get back to that deep, disciplined form of football. They did it for about 80% of the game against Kansas City Chiefs, but that 20% they lost that discipline, whether it be blown coverages, whether it be dumb penalties, it costs them big time. They know that. They already know that. The coaches know that. The players know that. We've talked to them this week. We know that they know that. Now you just got to go out there and get it done. I think a really big part of this, honestly, is that Sam Darnold is not Patrick Mahomes in any sense of the word. Like he can't run. He can't extend plays the way that a guy like Patrick Mahomes can. So I think that is going to be a little bit less of a challenge for this Washington Commanders defense. So if they can get back to what they were doing in those disciplined 80% reps, then they'll have a very good chance. And that allows you to then defend 3rd down. The Seattle Seahawks on 3rd and 7+, they're passing over 90% of the time. So again, you get into those, pass obvious situations. They use a lot of mesh concept, trying to defeat man coverage against defenses that want to be aggressive. The defensive line, get your hands up. Deron Payne has been tipping passes at a record rate. Linebackers and corners got to be ready to get immediate tackles, finish those plays if the ball gets out quick, and not allow them to get 1st down yardage. And then you've got some questionable players. Now, Sam Darnold and Devin Witherspoon, quarterback and cornerback, they're good to go. They're cleared. However, wide receiver Cooper Kupp, their slot receiver, is questionable. Defensive tackle Jaron Reed, he's also questionable. Wide receiver Jake Bobo, Derek Young, they're out. Christian Haynes is out. The guard, tight end Eric Saubert is all out as well. So those injuries are going to impact their depth. The Seahawks are getting a little bit healthier this week coming out of their bye, but they're not getting healthy. Now, the name that we haven't talked about as much, Jaxson Smith-Njigba, that is where this Commanders defense, you got to have bracket coverage, man. You got to take him out of the game. You got to do to him what other teams have done to Terry McLaurin, because if you don't, Jaxson Smith-Njigba, he can be the Jamar Chase. He can be the Terry McLaurin of the Seattle Seahawks roster, and he can absolutely wreak havoc in this game. I understand that Whitt Jr. likes to be aggressive. He likes to trust his guys. He likes to put them one-on-one. I think Jaxson Smith-Njigba is a guy that you kind of rewrite the script a little bit for, even if not in the beginning. If it starts to hit, if Jaxson Smith-Njigba and Sam Darnold start to connect, start to be your secondary, you got to be ready to make the adjustment if you're Whitt Jr. So those are some of the specific matchups and the situational plans for the Washington Commanders to get a win in Week 9. Now let's get to your fantasy. Let's get to your betting, where you might be able to win even if the Washington Commanders don't necessarily get that critical win they need on Sunday night. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, guys, let's talk about Rougiette. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Rougiette, and let's talk about something real. Life is all about confidence, whether you're on a football field, you're off the football field, whatever environment you're in, confidence is the key. We just talked about the defense needing to step up and perform in critical moments, like on 3rd down or in the red zone, but it's all about being ready when your number is called. And in life, you want that same confidence, you want that same readiness, but sometimes stress, age, or just the long day that you just had can impact your performance when it matters most, and you don't want to come up short in those big moments. That's where Rougiette comes in. Rougiette is a fast-acting sublingual treatment for ED that works in as little as 15 minutes. It's not a pill that you have to plan hours for. It is a compounded ingredient that comes in a convenient single-use dose that dissolves under your tongue so you can be ready anytime the moment is right. Rougiette is offering our listeners a special deal for a game-changing experience. Go to Rougiette.com. Use the code LOCKEDON for 20% off your first order. That's RUGIET.com. Code LOCKEDON for 20% off at Rougiette.com. We got our game plan. We've got our keys. We've got our matchups. Now let's get into the fantasy aspect and let's get into some bets that can make you a little bit of money, maybe find you some success, even if the Washington Commanders can't and they fall to their fourth straight loss of the season. Please do not let that happen. But of course, any given Sunday, not only could the Commanders overcome their 3.5-point margin of being an underdog, the Seattle Seahawks could also not only cover that 3.5 points, but get even more. So we'll have to see how it all unfolds. But if you're in fantasy, I think you got to go with Jayden Daniels. I understand that Jaden has missed a lot of time. He's coming back from another injury. You got a knee on the left, you got a hamstring on the right, and you got a mobile quarterback. All that stuff can be very, very tricky, but he has been cleared. And we know that this coaching staff has done a really good job of not putting guys out there before they're ready. I understand Terry McLaurin aggravated his quad again, but that's just something that can kind of happen, right? Medically cleared, felt good to go. They definitely took their time with Terry. Nobody can say they didn't take their time with him. In fact, the week before he was active, everybody's saying, why didn't you just put him on IR? So we can't have it both ways. You can't say, why didn't you put him on IR? And then, you rushed him back. Like those two things don't really jive, right? Anytime he's playing, he's exciting. He's a dynamic player. So Seattle's defense is absolutely going to have to game plan for him, but it's also going to open up opportunities for him down the field to do things like that. So we'll see what Jayden Daniels can do, but I think that his floor is high because of the rushing ability. His ceiling is even higher because if this offense can get rolling, guys, we've seen it. We haven't seen a lot this year, but we have seen it. If they can get rolling, he could have a really big day for you in fantasy football. Now we're going to do our 5 bets. We're going to do the same way we do every weekend. Safest, safe, risky, riskier, and riskiest bets. We'll start with the safest bet. Jayden Daniels, 150 or more passing yards. I think this is a very low bar for Jaden to clear on Sunday night, and I think he's going to be able to do it pretty easily. The safe bet is the total points scored over 39.5 points. I think a 20-20 score is 40 points total. I think you can expect 20 points from each of these teams on Sunday night in this game, especially with Jayden Daniels back in action. The risky bet is going to be running back Jacory Crosky-Merritt, anytime touchdown scorer. Look, he's still the lead back. At least he has been as of the last time we saw this team on the field. Again, I think that maybe Jeremy McNichols should really be the lead back. And then Chris should be in there to set the tone, be physical, and Jacory should be in there to take advantage of a tired defense and gash them. That's kind of just the way I think the room should operate. But Jacory Crosky-Merritt is like we've seen him, even some of these games he's struggled, man. He's like 1 or 2 steps away sometimes from a really big run, potentially a big touchdown run. So it's a little risky, but Jacory Crosky-Merritt, anytime touchdown scorer, riskier play. This is our same game parlay. I'm putting Jayden Daniels 200+ passing yards, Jaxson Smith-Njigba 50+ receiving yards, and Commanders by 3 or Commanders plus 3.5. So for plus 3.5, if you don't know, if the Commanders lose by 3 or less, or they win, then that bet wins. That part of the bet wins when you're plus 3.5. If you're minus 3.5, you have to win by at least 3.5 points, or so basically 4 points or more in order for that part of the bet to win. So a little bit riskier there with Jaden hitting over 200. I think Jaxson Smith-Njigba over 50 is probably pretty likely. And then, of course, the Commanders are underdogs, which makes it a little bit riskier. The riskiest bet of all, Commanders' first drive result being an offensive touchdown. This team has not scored touchdowns on their first drive, hardly at all this season, barely at all this season. They were on the way to do it a couple times this year with some turnovers. That interception against Chicago Bears, interception against Kansas City Chiefs. I think first drive result this weekend against Seattle Seahawks is a touchdown. Set that tone. But obviously it is the riskiest. But I got a little bit of a bonus for you here this weekend. So this weekend, the Washington Commanders are wearing their Super Bowl era throwback uniforms. You got a great looking uniform, great looking helmets, and you got Art Monk getting his jersey retired by the franchise. So I've got a little Art Monk SGP same game parlay. So my Art Monk same game parlay, I'm taking the Commanders on the money line, which means we're just taking them to win or lose. I'm not saying by how many points or anything like that, just Washington Commanders to win or lose. Jayden Daniels, 225+ passing yards. Luke McCaffrey, 1 or more reception. Luke McCaffrey, 5 or more receiving yards. Jayden Daniels, 1 or more passing touchdown. And I'm taking Zach Ertz anytime touchdown. And I'll tell you, my inspiration for this is the fact that this is very similar to the stat lines that happened the last time Art Monk played for Washington against the Seattle Seahawks. Monk himself had 1 catch for 9 yards. This, of course, was towards the end of his career. Mark Rippon threw for 248 yards and 1 touchdown. That touchdown pass went to tight end Terry Orr. So you'll see some of these stat lines kind of matching that. So that is my Art Monk same game parlay for this weekend. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we will be talking Sunday nights, maybe a little bit early Monday morning, depending on how long the game goes, about all of the action. So if you got questions, if you got comments, and you want to know all the information as quickly as possible, you can get text messages from me during games, during press conferences throughout the week, whatever it is, by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Not only are you going to get information sent directly to you via text message from me, but you're also going to have access to conversations with me, pregame, postgame Zooms, all kinds of fun stuff. The insiders that are there seem to like it, and it hasn't grown as much as the losing has happened, understandably, but still having a good time in the insider group. Anyway, for your second listening to Double Dose of the Locked On NFL podcast, get the national view of the NFL, of the Washington Commanders, and everything in between on Locked On NFL twice per day on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's podcast. Every day, as I see you, I appreciate you every single day. And I know, again, another special thank you for coming through today. Until next time, everybody out there, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and we'll talk again real soon on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.